Hey, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we are learning Maseches Zevachim Daf Gimel, and we are starting 6 lines or so from the bottom of the page. Yesterday we crossed an assumption that we're going to analyze now, and that is as follows. First words on the line: V'gabe get the stomach puzzle minolan. How do we know that a get that was written stam? How do we know that it's puzzle? So we're going to actually go through 5 answers until we get our answer. Our answer will be at about a quarter of the way down on Gimel Amud Aleph. So here's answer number one. We have a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that we learned a while back in Gittin Daf Chav Dalet. Haya over b'shuk. A man was walking through the marketplace. V'shama sofrim makrin, and they heard a sofer saying out loud, Ish ploni giresh plonis mimakam ploni. He said, Chaim ben Ruvain is divorcing, pick a Yiddish minute, Zelda Bas, whatever. All right? And they live in the same city. The guy says, Givaldik, v'omar, zeh shemi v'zeh shem ishti, and I don't like her. This is perfect. I didn't even have to write the get. It's all made already. So it says the Gemara, Pasa l'garish bo. So what do we see over here? A get that was written stam, and we see that it's not working. So maybe, says the Gemara, that the Marimakom that teaches us that a get that's given stam is puzzle is Mishnah and Gittin Chav Dalet. Says the Gemara, no. Don't look at the Rav Papa. Perhaps that case of Haya over Bashuk, when this guy was walking through the marketplace, was like Rav Papa said, and he said this to Amar Rav Papa, Hacha besofrim ha'asin li'islamid askinan, v'lo ichtav l'shum krisus klal. They were just practicing. We know that Gittin were very complicated to build. Remember, there's different kinds of Gittin. Remember the get that was folded on itself and stitched. We wanted people to make these decisions b'mesinos and make them carefully. So the Gemara says in the name of Rav Papa that source number one is not a good source. Why not? Because in source number one, perhaps they were just sofrim who were practicing. When I was in Shalvim, I had a bunch of friends who started doing safras. I don't think any of them do it anymore. But we saw scraps of parchment. They were just practicing. So had they written a get, it would have been a zero. Not because the get was written stam, because it was just written to practice. It wasn't even being written as a get. They just picked a get to copy. So they did. That's why that doesn't work. So let's try answer number two. Elameha, perhaps we can learn from the second Marimakom. This also is in that Mishnah on Daf Chav Daled in Gittin. And the Gemara says as follows. Yeser al kain, even more so. Again, the even more so is not very helpful out of context, but we're going to ignore that for now. Kasav legarish es ishto v'nimlach. Let's say that a man writes a get to divorce his wife, and then after writing the get, he changes his mind. But Matzah ben Iro, another guy who lives in his city, knows that he wrote this, and he also knows that he has the same name as the man, and his wife has the same name as the wife. V'amar lo shmi k'shimcha v'shem ishti k'shem ishtecha. Pasal l'garesh bo. So what do we see over here? A get that was written kind of stam. It wasn't really written stam. It was written for woman number one, and we're trying to apply the get. I should say it was couple number one, and we're trying to apply to couple number two. Maybe we could infer from here, suggest the Gemara in our second answer, that maybe we can say the reason we know that a get that was written stam is puzzle is because of this brisa, this Mishnah. Says the Gemara, no. Dilma shani hasam de intikle l'shem gerushin dehahu. It could be that this was cut away from all the other ones. What does that mean? It means it was specifically intended for this exact couple. You can't say that the Mishnah was written so broadly that anyone who fits the bill can use it. That's not what's going on. And in fact, we assume that this get was written specifically for couple number one, even though the names are identical. Look, we have last names now. It's a whole different world by us because I actually I was Masada Kedushin once. I try to avoid it like the plague. I was asked, I did it, and Rabbi Matenki guided me. And I asked him, do we write the Mishpachas Karesh in the, whatever the family name of the aid was, the Mishpachas Merzel, if they're going to be the Chassan? So let's say that it was a David ben Sion, and they will say the Mishpachas Merzel. Do we write that? So whatever his answer was, it's easier for us now because we have last names. But if the guy's name is Chaim ben Ruvain, and the Kala's name is Shoshana bas Shimon, okay, it's much easier. There was one less factor. And there are some names out there. I've never seen anyone with my name, Hillel Pinchas. My brother Avi, Avram Gershon, I've seen quite a bit. I've seen a number of people with that name. I think Elliot Cohen is Avram Gershon, or his father's name is Avram Gershon. Is he Elliot? His father. His father's Avram Gershon. So there were a few. I've met some Nassim Tzvis. I've not met Tzvi Nassim. My sister is Rivka Rachel. I don't think I've ever met a Rivka Rachel. Shmuel Mordechai, we have that way. Mark Halpert's Mordechai Shmuel. Oh, didn't know that. There you go. Very rare.
Time we were in Israel, I went to the shiur Litzanim near where I live. I'm sitting down. I didn't know it was Shabbos or not. And I looked over the guy this bag. It's more. What are the chances?
Not very high. Not very high. But I've literally never met anyone with my pair of names in either order. Good job, Dad. So answer number 3, we can't take answer number 2. Elameha. Let's try again. And again, we're still talking about the same exact source. It was a lengthy Mishnah Maseches Gittin. We're 5 lines down on Gimel Amud Aleph. Yeser al kain, yesh lo shtei nashim, sheshmosehen shavos. Could you imagine such a home? A man marries 2 women. They both are Shoshana Bas Shimon. That's not confusing, right? Well, first of all, marrying 2 women, bichlal. And then on top of that, they have the same exact, they're both Shoshana. The Gemara says, Kosav legarish es hagdola. He writes the get to divorce Shoshana Bas Shimon, who is older than the younger one. So the halacha is lo yegarish es haktana. Perhaps we can infer from here, like we were trying to figure out, this is our 3rd attempt, that if a get is written stam, it can't be used for other purposes. Says the Gemara, no. Dilma shayni hasam de intikle l'shem gerushin dehahi. Same as before. Perhaps he earmarked this particular get for the older woman, for the older wife, and therefore it's just unusable. Let's try answer number 4. Elameha yeser al elameha. The Mishnah says yeser al kain. And what does it say? Amar lelavlar. A lavlar is a scribe or a sofer. So Amar lelavlar ksov uleeza she'ertza agarish. Just write it. I have 2 wives. They're both named Shoshana Bas Shimon, and whichever one I'm in the mood to divorce, I'll divorce. So pasal l'garish bo. This is beautiful. This is a great example because it was written mamish with the intent to be usable for anyone with that name. The halacha is it's pasal. So maybe we can therefore infer from here that the reason why the get is pasal is because it's stam. Says the Gemara, no. Dilma shayni hasam de'ain breira. Ooh, we're not going to get into breira. But breira is retroactive decision making. So let's say the get was written on Aleph Elul, and he wants to get divorced on Chaf Hey Elul, which is today. So then what that means is if we say there is breira, so then I can retroactively say that on the 25th I was megale which Shoshana I wanted to divorce, and then when I go back to Aleph Elul, fine, that was really what I had intended. But according to the sheet of Ein Brera, no dice. You can't go back in time. And therefore, this would not work. And maybe that's why this part of the Mishnah from Gittin Chav Daled, where the man says to the scribe, just write the get. I have 2 wives that are named Shoshana Bas Shimon. I'll apply it to the one that I want. Does not work. So now let's take our 5th and final answer, Elameha. And now we've moved 2 blot later in Maseches Gittin to Daf Chaf Vav. And there the Brisa says, or the Mishnah says, Hakosev Tofse Gittin. If someone writes the main part of the get, remember we have the tofes, which is the tofes and the torah. The tofes is the general script of the get, and the toref is the parts of the script that are customizable. If you've ever seen a ksuba before it's filled out, there's the tofes, which is the general format, and then it has blank lines. Eich hachasan, blank line. Eich hakala habasula, whatever the lashon is, and vikanina, we leave that one blank. So then the tofes is the general templating. So says the Gemara, Hakosev tofse gittin. Let's say I want to save time. I'm a sofer. I know that 100 people are going to get divorced this year by the numbers. I'm going to write 100 tofsim. So what does he need to leave over in order to make the get kosher? Tzarach she'aniach makom ha'ish, a name for the man, umakom ha'isha, a space for the woman's name, umakom ha'edim, umakom hazman. What's makom ha'edim?
For the son. Witnesses. Which obviously, how can someone ever fill it in?
I have a note here on the side that says Ktsas Misholel Havana. Uve Mishnah de Gittin Lesa. Pasha, makom. What? He says, Uva Mishnah de Gittin Lesa on Daf Chavav. You seem to know the Daf. You're like running through it in your head, which is more than the rest of us are doing. Anyways, Umakom Ha'edim, Umakom Hazman. I don't know why I felt like that. I mean, that was just so obvious to me. Maybe like, of course, obviously you can't pre-sign the Edim. I don't know. Okay. This was in Hagos Vitzionim. Yeah, it's from the Gilion. So this one you should have. So that's what the Mishnah says, that when it comes to the Tofes, you can pre-write the template of the Gittin, no problem, but you have to leave these 4 or 5 things not filled in, and then you can fill them in afterwards. V'amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel, af tzarach sheyaniach makom, you have to also leave the space of hareat muteres l'chol adam. That needs to be written in fresh for each woman, that you are now permissible to marry other men. So what do we see from here? Stam doesn't work. Stam Gittin don't work. You can't prescript a shtar, a get in full. You must customize those blank lines for those people. And that is the final answer to this question. We're now a third of the way down at the 2 dots on Gimel Amid Aleph. And now we understand why a stam get is not kosher. Very good. Now, if you'll remember from yesterday, there was a conversation that took place between Ravina and Rav Papa. And just to refresh ourselves, because the language was beautiful, on the top of Beis and Mid-Beis, the language there said, Amar le Ravina le Rav Papa, lo havis gaban be'urta, you weren't in the Beis Medrash last night when we heard some gorgeous Torah from Rava. And one of the gorgeous things that we spoke about was this closing sugya that we just said, is whether or not stam korbanos are kosher, and we tried to make a tzushtel to learn from the world of Gittin. So now what we're going to do is learn the next 2 questions that Rava had asked as well. And we are right now at those 2 dots, a third of the way down on Gimel Amid Aleph. Su Rami Milsa Achrisi. Rava also brought together a stira of seemingly 2 ideas. Mi Amar of Yehuda Amar Rav. Did Rav really mean to say the following? Chatas sheshachta l'shem ola psula. If I take a korban chatas and I shecht it shelo lishma, I shecht it for the sake of an ola. So Rav holds that it's puzzle. So I took a chatas and I tried to shecht it as an ola puzzle. However, shachta l'shem chulin kshera. If I took my chatas and I decided that I wanted to instead have a barbecue, so then the halacha is that it's kshera. Now, I need your lumdish cups here. Listen carefully. Alma, what do we see from the din of Rav? Dimina machribba, that which is of likeness, they're similar. An ola and a chatas are both korbanos. So when my shelo lishma is in a space where things are similar, then machribba, then it ruins it. And by Rav, what was that case? A chatas that's brought as an ola's puzzle. So because they're mina, they're the very same type, they're both korbanos, it's therefore puzzle. However, the second line of Rav was about shachta l'shem chulin. De lav mina lo machriba. When you take a chatas and you shecht it as a regular chulin, just to have dinner, that's not mina. That's not chatas ola that are both korbanos. Achatas and chulin are completely different worlds. One is hektish, one is being brought in the Beis HaMikdash, the other you literally shechted in the backyard. Totally different. So what we infer from Rav Shita is these general rules that when things are mina, when your shelo lishma was between a chatas and an ola and a shlamim and kadshe and kodesh kodashim, all of those are mina, and therefore shelo lishma ruins it. But when you move from the genre of korbanos to the genre of chulin, that's too far apart, and therefore lo machriv. Therefore, that's not considered to be problematic. However, and this is where Rava's question, remember this is Rava's question number 2. Uraminhi, we have a brisa that does not seem to agree to this fundamental principle that mina is machariv and lav mina is lo machriv. What's the source? Kol haget shenichtav shelo l'shem isha pasal. If there's a get that's written that's not for the sake of a woman, it's pasal. Look at this line. Ve'afilu l'shem avodas kochavim nami pasal. Even if a get was written for a goy, it's also pasal. Now, halacha l'maisa, halacha l'maisa. Their marriage is zir masusim zir masam. They have a civil divorce. That's all. That's all we would have argued that they would have needed, because we taka do have some certain isurim, right? We have one of the sheva mitzvos b'nei noach is gilui arayos. So we need to know when a woman is divorced, so she's not in violation of gilui arayos, even if she's a goy. But the halacha is by a goyim that whatever the civil divorce is of the land, that's considered sufficient. So a person goes down to wherever they go to get a civil divorce, fill out the paperwork, sign, write a check, you're done. You're divorced if you're a goy. Now, what does the Gemara seem to imply over here? It doesn't spell it out for us, so we had to do a little bit of the hard work here, and the Rishonim explain as follows. When you have a get that's shelo lishma that's given to a woman, that's puzzle, lo lishma. However, even for a goy who's shelo b'mina, right? She's not one of us. She's a goy. Afal pikein, even though she's shelo b'mina, she's still puzzle. That goes against the principle that we extracted from Rav a couple of moments ago. Remember that we said that if a chatas is brought as chulin, we said no problem, lo machriv. They're too far apart. And if a get is given to a goy, what should we have expected? Also, no problem. She's divorced. But we didn't say that. We said it's puzzle. That's a kasha on Rav. And this was Rava's question that he raised, question number 2. And the Gemara responds, Vishani, how did Rava respond to this? So he said, don't worry. Get, dal avodas kochav. When we talk about get, if you remove the conversation of the guy for just a minute, dal avodas kochav mine, havale stama puzzle. Look at the case that was presented. Kol haget shenichtav shelo l'shem isha pasal. The whole conversation, the bedrock of that line, is that the get was written stam. Forget about the woman who's a goy. That's an afterthought. It's a complicating factor, but it's not really relevant. The base that we're talking about is that the get was shelo lishma. So therefore, it would be shelo lishma even for a goy. It's not because she's shelo b'mina, the goy. That's why it's not a kasha on Rav. But by kodshim, dal chulin minayu, by kodshim, if you remove the sampling of chulin, and all that happened was chatas to ola, whatever the case may be, havale stama, the stama ksherim in general. When something is brought stam by korbanos, they're kosher. So this was question 2 and the answer to question 2. Here's question 3, 2/3 of the way down. V'rama milsa achrisi. Again, really all connected back to the Gemara from the top of Beis and Beis, where Ravina told Rav Papa, you should not have missed a night seder last night. Here is the third question that was raised. Says the Gemara, Mi Amar Rav, Yehuda Amar Rav, did Rav really say this idea? Same line as before. We're using it as the first part of the question. Chatas sheshachta l'shem ola. If you take a chatas and you misappropriate it and you did it shelo lishma, you brought it as an ola, we said that that's psula. We also said that shachta l'shem chulin is kshera. The alma is also the same exact maramakom. Alma, says the Gemara, Demina Machriba, that when both of them are in the genre of korbanos and it's shelo lishma, they're like 2 north poles. That does not work. And shelo lishma is psula. And therefore, mina is machrib. However, de lo mina lo machrib, where it's shachta l'shem chulin, that's apples and oranges. Those are really not the same genre. Korbanos are hektish, and chulin is totally not hektish, and therefore, lo machribah. Hi, v'hotanya. And now we need to put on our thinking caps for a little bit of a difficult Gemara. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Tocho, let's learn the pasuk inside. The pasuk says, where's the pasuk? Here it is. The pasuk in Vayikra Lamed Yud Aleph, the pasuk says, V'chol kli cheres, if you have an earthenware vessel, asher yipol mehem el tocho, that something tame gets inside the airspace, Kol asher besocho yitma, anything that's in the container will also become aser. Ve'oso sishboru, and the only way to get rid of tuma is to destroy the kli. So let's say that I'm holding an earthenware vessel, and let's say that I'm holding a sheretz. So the very moment that the sheretz breaks into the airspace, the kli and everything in it instantly becomes tamei if it's earthenware. Yeah, it's a chiddush of the Torah. So let's go back inside. The Gemara says, the pasuk says tocho, v'lo toch tocho. So now the case changes. Let's say that I had a vessel within a Russian dolls. I had a vessel within a vessel. This outer vessel was made of earthenware. Inside this vessel was a closed vessel. We'll soon see that was made even out of metal. So now what happens? I have a vessel, cheres. Inside this vessel is a smaller vessel that fits fully, sealed, made out of metal, holding a sheretz, and I dip the sheretz into the airspace. What happens to the outer vessel? That we know. Tame. What happens to the liquid in here? Also tame. What happens to the sealed container of liquid inside? Tocho, below toch tocho. The drasha is that the inner vessel will not become tameh. It's a taich in the whole concept of getting into the airspace of the kli cheres. So we're learning something new. Not everything that's inside the kli cheres is always tameh. If something that's in there is itself a closed vessel, then the drasha of tocho is tocho velo toch tocho. That even the in that not even that the inner vessel will still stay tahor if it's sealed. That even the contents of the inner vessel are still okay.
Still okay, okay.
Correct. I don't know. So that's the chiddush is that even though the pasuk, and we talk about this in Shas all the time, this concept, that you get into this we're familiar with. The chiddush of the Gemara is tocha below toch tocho, is that the inner vessel, including its contents, remains tahor, sealed, has to be sealed. Okay, but you needed a drasha for it. Because you could have argued that the pasuk state and flumish, you could have just said anything that's in that vessel is going to be problematic. Now, here's where things get a little bit unique, and this is where our question is going to be on Rav. Ve'afilu kli shetef matzil. Even if the inner kli is a kli shetef, namely a kli that can be rinsed, namely a kli that goes to the mikvah, metal. Kli cheres, how do you fix a kli cheres? Shattered into 1,000 pieces. Even if the inner vessel is shalomina, even if the inner vessel is not made out of the same material as kli cheres, the pasuk was only talking about cheres. Even if the inner vessel is not kli cheres, it's still tahor. That's a little bit of a chiddush. That's more of a chiddush. And what do we see? We see that shalomina is lo machriv. We see that even though it's metal, it doesn't get destroyed in this case. Namely, it's still tahor. Kasha and Rav, because Rav said that shalom machriv, that shalomina is lo machriv, and over here it's actually a little bit difficult to learn this piece of Gemara because the language doesn't really fit nicely. Because really, what's happening is that the halacha is that it's the opposite, right? That the din of the inner kli is the opposite. So really, what's happening is that it's charif. What we're really saying is that the rule is broken. So therefore, when it comes to the klisheta, the vessel within the vessel, we would say that it should have been that it's just like the rest of the kli, but we didn't say that. So therefore, it's a violation against what Rav said. Vishani, and how do we answer this? So says the Gemara, says the Gemara, Vishani, asu chulin eitzel kachim. When we talk about the din of Rav, that chulin and kachim are very different. So that's kimechitza eitzel tanur. That's like a mechitza that's in an oven. Does a mechitza have a place in an oven? Mechitzas don't have a place in an oven. Not at all. So therefore, ma mechitza eitzel tanur lo mahanyu laklal. Just like a mechitza that's inside an oven doesn't help at all. I don't care if you have a mechitza in an oven. Your mechitza is not helpful. If there's tuma on one side, there will be tuma on the other. So really, this idea that Rav can say that if you take a chatas and you shecht it l'shem chulin, it's kasher, that's very similar to this idea of having a mechitza inside an oven. Everything is going to continue totally normally. Ditznan. And we have a Mishnah to discuss this idea. This is a Mishnah in Maseches Kelim. Says the Gemara, tanur, which is made out of earthenware, shechatzetzu b'nesarim, someone put a piece of wood in the middle and split the oven into two, o biarios, or with some type of sheet. V'nimtza sheretz b'makom echad, and on one side of this mechitza, this makeshift mechitza, you find a sheretz, hakol tameh. And this is really the comparison, not toch tocho. Toch tocho is not a good comparison. Really, the comparison is that chulin, when someone took a chatas and used it for chulin, it's so not related to one another. They're so far apart, just like a mechitza is irrelevant in an oven. That was the comparison. Tochtocha was not a good comparison, so that's what we're rejecting. Now, this Mishnah from Kalim continues. Kaveres, let's say that you had a basket, shehi pchusa, it's been reduced, or actually, it really has a lot of holes in it, it's falling apart. Upkuka bekash, but what you did is you stopped in a couple pieces of straw and hay, you kind of wove it in so that you could still use the basket without things falling through. Umishul sheles la'aviratanur. You take this basket and you put it into the airspace of the oven that is made out of cheres. If there's a sheretz bisocha, if there's a sheretz in your makeshift basket, remember your basket has holes in it, it's not a high quality basket. If there's a sheretz in the basket, then hatanur tameh, then the oven's going to be tameh. If there's a sheretz bitanur, if there was an oven that had a sheretz in it, and then you lowered the basket in it with food, ochlin shebesocha tmein, then the food that's inside your messed up basket is also going to be tameh. This is the Tanakama. However, Rabbi Eliezer mitahir. Rabbi Eliezer says this would be mutter. Seemingly both of these cases would be mutter. So he argues entirely. Now, Rav only makes sense according to the Tanakama, because Rav needs the comparison of doing a korban chatas, using it for chulin, to the case of the tanur with a mechitza. That only works for the Tanakama, and we're going to bring out this question in a moment. Because according to Rabbi Eliezer, that wouldn't work for Rav. It's the exact opposite because he holds that the mechitza works. Now, what's Rabbi Eliezer's svara? So the Mishnah in Kalim continues. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, kal v'chomer, im hitzil b'meis, if under certain circumstances a mechitza would help in regards to a meis, which is hechamor, which is a very strict type of tuma, lo tatzil b'kli cheres hakal. If at times we see that a mechitza can help with a mace, then why wouldn't we say it works with klicheres, which is a much lower level of tuma? Good argument from Rabbi Eliezer. Say the Rabbanon, Amru lo. That's incorrect. You're not allowed to argue that way. Mirza Hashem will get to the bottom of the page. This is a tougher daf, so hopefully we'll get there. Says the Gemara, you can't use that kal b'chomer, because on the top of Gimel Amud Beis it says, im hitzil b'meis hechamor, if it's going to help at all with the tumas mace, which is much, much higher, says the Gemara, and I'll just add in the change of the Gemara, shekain chalukin oalen. But that's because we normally have limits when it comes to tumas mace. We know that an ohel helps with it limits the tuma to a specific. It doesn't go lateral forever. We know it goes out l'rakia, but it doesn't go sideways forever, only till the end of the ohel. So that's normal for us to have limits. That's why a mechitza helps. But tatzil b'klicheres hakal she'ein chalukin klicheres, which is the appropriate girsa, that requires a little bit of a change. That's not normal. It's not normal to put a mechitza in klicheres. So the Gemara says your kal v'chomer is ridiculous. Not every kal v'chomer works. Your kal v'chomer is saying that a mechitza is normal by mechitza is not normal by klicheres. It's normal by a mace. It's just not normal by klicheres. So the Rabbanan fundamentally disagree with the kal v'chomer. So then the Gemara says the question that I foreshadowed a little bit. Look, you want to say that perhaps the din of Rav, that when a chatas is brought for chulin, that it's really so far apart from one another that perhaps it's comparable to the Mishnah in Kalim that says that there's a mechitza in an oven. Hateinach leRabbanan, who say that that's a ridiculous thing and therefore the tuma would traverse that wall, the mechitza. But Rabbi Eliezer, who says that it's taka, that a taka does work, that if there was an animal that was tameh inside the oven and there was a mechitza, so then the things on the other side would be tahor. That's a big problem. Ma'ikal Neymar. How then could we understand Rav through the lens of Rabbi Eliezer? That's difficult. So the Gemara says, really, Rabbi Eliezer fundamentally agrees with you, but Rabbi Eliezer kal v'chomer ka'amar only by klicheres. In general, he agrees. He does. It's only when it comes to the klicheres do we have this kal v'chomer. Otherwise, he in general agrees. Yachi, says the Gemara, if that's true, hasam nami lema kal v'chomer, maybe we can also say a kal v'chomer with Rav's case. Kadshin mechalel and kadshin. Something holy can be mechalel, something holy. So what does that mean? Achatas, which is being used as an ola, you profaned it, you ruined it. It's not going to count. Chulin lo kol shekain. Maybe we should have used the kal v'chomer that chulin all the more so it should have been ruined against Rav. Says the Gemara, great question. Ella, time of the Rav is kirabi Eloi, not Rabbi Elazar, but Rabbi Eloi. That's what the note says over here. Tzarach lomar Eloi, to Amar Rabbi Eloi, kachu b'dfusim yeshanim uverishonim uvekisvei yad. And it actually says where the error it actually tells you which version of Shas the Gemara messed up. V'hishtana b'dfus pei dalid mem, whatever that stands for. What?
The four cities, I forgot exactly which they were, their initial four cities, I think. Frankfurt and that, I think.
Oh, mines?
Yeah.
So that wasn't so long ago.
No, I mean, the fruits of that.
Well, I don't think tfusa means printing press. I think it means versions of Shas. But nevertheless, it's pretty cool that they tagged the timing of the error. So this is not Rabbi Elazar, it's Rabbi Eli. So why is it? Look, if we have this kal v'chomer, then Rav's whole house of cards falls apart. How then can Rav say that if a chatas is brought as chulin, that it's going to be kosher? So says the Gemara, it must be that he follows Rabbi Eloi. To Amar Rabbi Eloi, my time of the Rav, because v'lo yechalalu es kodshei b'nei Yisrael asher yarimu la'Hashem, that you cannot yechalalu, whatever the word is, deconsecrate. That's the word. You cannot deconsecrate the kodshim of Bnei Yisrael asher yarimu la'Hashem. Oh, what can't you consecrate? Only something that's yarimu la'Hashem. Kodshim are mechalal and kodshim, but ve'ein chulin mechalal and kodshim. And that's how Rav sources himself. Rav is good, meaning even within the shita of Rabbi Eliezer, even with his kal v'chomer, Rav still has an approach, which is that he holds like Rabbi Eloi. So we're still good to go. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Alma, what did we just see from here? That asakra and afke mikal v'chomer. We had the pasuk that Rabbi Eloi brought of v'lo yechalalu, and it undid the kal v'chomer that we just made up of kachim, mechalal, and kachim. So hachanami, maybe by Rabbi Eliezer also, lesi tocho and lifke mikal v'chomer. Rabbi Eliezer has a kal v'chomer that is he's a Tana. He can have a kal v'chomer if his Rabbeim gave him one. The problem is that the pasuk should have uprooted it. And if the pasuk of Tocho could have uprooted, then we would have just saved the last 10 lines of Gemara. Because we said, wait 1 second, Rabbi Eliezer says not this way, and he has a kal v'chomer. What do you mean? No, Tocho should uproot the kal v'chomer. So if that happened, we should have removed our question on the third line of Hotenach l'Rabban and l'Rabbi Elazar Ma'ikal Meimar, because we should be able to reject it. Says the Gemara, no, you can't do that, because Hai Tocho miboile. Rabbi Eliezer uses the word Tocho for the following: Le'ochlen shegiblon betit. If you have a food that's wrapped up in dirt, let's say you have a food that's fully wrapped up in clay or in dirt, v'hichnisan la'avir hatanor, and you put it into the tanur. Salka daita chamina, ho'alu v'negia lo mitma. Let's say that there was a sheretz in there, something like that. What would happen if my food is fully encased in dirt? Or let's use a modern example. It's fully encased in plastic, right? We have these steam in the bag vegetables, givaldic. We use them all the time in our house. And you put them in the microwave, good to go. Let's say there was a sheretz in there. What would be the status of the contents of that steam in the bag vegetables? Would that separation be valid? So says the Gemara, Uvinigia lo mitma, it didn't touch the walls of that tamei kli. Be'aviro nami lo mitmu, it's actually doesn't even have air access because it's covered in dirt. So therefore, kamash malan, you might have thought that it wasn't going to be tamei. Kamash malan, that the dirt doesn't serve as a barrier between whatever tuma's in that oven and the food itself. Rabbanon, what do they do with the pasuk of Tocho? We know what Rabbi Eliezer did with it. They felt that food that's wrapped up, of course it's going to be tamei. I don't need a pasuk for that. That's like obvious to them. Not so obvious, but they held it was obvious and wasn't worthy of a drasha. Okay, now what we're going to do is learn another question that was asked, not a Rava question. We've asked all of Rava's questions, 3 asked and 3 answered. Now we're going to look at similar questions that were asked by other people, 2 more, and then we'll stop for the night. We're at the 2 dots, 2/3 of the way down on Gimel Amud Beis. Rav Yosef bar Ami Rami Shinui Kodesh Ashinui Bailim. Shinui Kodesh, when there's a change in Kodesh, which is Shalol Lishma. I did something wrong with my Kodesh. And Shinui Bailim is I was supposed to bring the Korban for me, but then the animal was brought for you. Umashani. He's going to ask from these areas. He's also going to answer his own question. Now, this might sound familiar. Mi Amar Rab, or maybe Rabbi Huda Amar Rab, that chatas sheshachta l'shem chatas. Let's say that I had a chatas that I brought for your chatas. I brought it for the wrong. It's shinui bailim, kshera, l'shem ola. But if it was shinui kodesh, I did it for the wrong kavana, psula. So Rav seems to say that if it's shalol lishma, almad la delav mina machriba. If it's very similar, if it's for a chatas for an ola, then machriba. Dimina, the other way, Alma, delav mina machriba. When something is not similar, a chatas to an ola, that's lav mina, so then it's going to be psula, it ruins it. Dimina, but a chatas that's brought for another person's chatas, dimina lo machriba. So that's what we were able to glean from the statement of Rav. But says the Gemara, hold on one second, that can't be. Ve'amar Rav himself, chatas sheshachta al mi shemechuyev chatas psula. Elsewhere, he says the exact opposite, that a chatas that was brought for another person's chatas is psula. Al mi shemechuyev ola kshera. But if that chatas was brought for someone that was an ola, kshera, literally the exact opposite. Same author, total reverse. It says the Gemara, Alma, what do we see from this second statement of Rav? What we see is a stira, and let's call it out. Alma, debar mina machriba, in this second version, that which was very similar, I brought a chatas for you, that was psula, and delav mina lo machriba. But when the chatas was brought as an ola, that's delav mina, they're different korbanos, there we said lo machriba. So we have a stira within Rav. So how do we answer this stira within Rav? So the Gemara says umashani, 2/3 of the way down. Hasam, over there by the chatas, sheshachta al mishim mechuyev chatas, v'shachatos al chatas amarachmana, v'harei chatas l'shem chatas nishchita. In the first case, we said that it's okay if the chatas was sheshachta l'shem chatas, that's fine because the pasuk says so. But hacha, over here in this second case, v'chiper alav ksiv, alav v'lo al chavero. That's different. The korban is still okay, the kapara is not okay. Chavero dum yadidei, they have to be very similar. Shemechuyev kapara kamoso. Only if it is the same exact scenario. If it's not the same exact scenario, then it doesn't work. And as mentioned, we're going to have one more question answer, and then we'll be done. We'll be ending right at the end of the page at the 2 dots. Rav Chaviva, Rami Shinui Bailim, Atoch Tocho Umeshani. Rav Chaviva asked a question on Shinui Bailim, that's changing who you're bringing the korban for, me instead of you, or you instead of me. And on the case of Toch Tocho, as you'll recall, Toch Tocho was a case where the outer vessel was a kli cheres. The inner vessel was even a metal vessel. And as we pointed out, that once a sheretz was put inside the outer vessel and the liquid in the outer vessel are pasul, are tameh, but the inner vessel that's sealed and its contents are still tahor. That was toch tocha. So let's see the Gemara's question. Umi Amar Rav, does Rav really say chatas sheshachta al mi shemechuyev chatas psula, that if one person shechts their chatas for another person that's pasul, al mi shemechuyev ola kshera, same source as we saw in regards to the question of Rav Yosef bar Ami. Alma, what do we see from this idea, from this line? Dimina machribba, that if it is similar, they're both chatas, mine and yours are chatas, there we said, dimina machribba, it's going to be pasul, but lav mina, if it's chatas for an ola, lo machribba. But how can you say that? Ve'atanya, tocha v'lo toch tocha, afilu kli shetef matzil. That's lav kamina. The inner vessel that's metal is lav kamina. It's metal, it's not cheres. And yet, nevertheless, we still said that it's kosher. That means that lav kamina is lo machrib. But over here, it wasn't that way. So says the Gemara, umeshani, no, let me tell you why you're wrong. Arba tocho ksivi. We have the word toch that's listed 4 times. Toch tocho, toch tocho. And if they'll just look in the psukim this way, that's what the pasuk says. V'chol kli cheres. Whatever you can look at the pasuk here, it says el tocho, and then it says bisocho. Fine. So what are the uses of these psukim? And that's why the Bryce is different. Chad legufe. While we're learning this, just keep a finger on Rashi, 6 lines from the bottom, because Rashi will explain some of these case scenarios. Chad legufe. One of the tochs is legufe. What does legufe mean? Sheyitma ochlin me aviro. That in a kli cheres, once the sheretz gets into the airspace, it's going to be tamei. V'chad l'gzeira shava. One is used for gzeira shava. Rashi says v'chad l'gzeira shava sheyit masheretz es hakli ve'afal pi shelo noga. That's a chiddush that it became tamei only in the airspace. It was learned out from gzeira shava. The next one is chad tocho shel zeh v'lo tocho shel acher. This is a longer Rashi, so I'll just shorten this for you. That it only applies when the kli is made out of cheres. It has to be out of this material only. So therefore, this in fact is metal. And let's say I took a sheretz and put this in the air and it didn't touch the kli, you're fine. You're fine. It's a chiddush dekadin by cheres. That's the last thing. And then the last one is an idach tocho v'lo toch tocho ve'afilu kli shetef matzil. So basically, the usage over here of the drushas are very thorough. And this last one teaches off that kli shetef is matzil. So that's why there was no stira. We tried to ask in the camp of Reb Chaviva about shinui balim from toch tocho. No, toch tocho is a huge chiddush. And ein l'chabor l'chidusho. We'll stop right here at the bottom. Yimir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up with Daf Daled, and as much as we can do on Daf Hey Amid Aleph, wishing you all a beautiful night.